Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're taking a deep dive into Richard B. Frank's monumental work, Guadalcanal, the definitive account of the landmark battle.
An absolutely foundational book.
Yeah,
It's really seen as the first study to give you that truly balanced picture, isn't it?
exactly. What makes it so special is how Frank pulls together the American side and newly available Japanese sources. We're talking, 101 volumes of their official war history?
Yeah. Massive undertaking. It lets him paint a picture across land, sea, and air like nobody had before.
So our mission today is basically to pull out the key insights, give you a solid understanding of this landmark conflict without you having to read all 900 pages, though we recommend you do.
Definitely. So for this deep dive, we're really focusing on three big themes that just jump out from Frank's account. First up, that quest for balance we mentioned, how he shows both sides.
Right. Then strategic decisions and intelligence, the planning, the intel wins and blunders, the key figures,
Yeah.
all the stuff that shaped how it unfolded.
And finally, you can't talk about Guadalcanal without hitting the brutality of combat and logistics. The sheer horror the troops faced, the fighting, the supply nightmares, it pushed everyone to the edge.
Absolutely. Those themes run through the whole thing. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start? The strategic picture in 42.
Yeah, got to set the stage. So the U.S. is operating under Rainbow 5, WPL-46, the formal name.
And the priority was very much Germany first, wasn't it? Pacific was defense.
Pretty much. Hold the line east of the 180th meridian, basically protect Samoa, Palmyra, keep things contained.
But Admiral King, Comment CH, he wasn't entirely happy with just defense in the Pacific, was he?
Not at all. He was pushing hard, really pushing to set up forward bases in the South Pacific, places like Tonga Tabu. The Army resisted quite a bit.
Recourse arguments, I bet.
Exactly. But King got Nimitz on board, enthusiastically even. So right away, you see this internal friction, this debate within the U.S. command about Pacific strategy before Guadalcanal even happens.
Which is fascinating when you compare it to the Japanese side. Their setup was different.
Very different. You had General Tojo as premier, but the emperor. Not much direct military control in practice. And the Army and Navy had wildly different ideas about the war.
Right? The Army was thinking, attack Southeast Asia, grab resources, then eventually pivot to attack the Soviets.
That was their grand vision, yeah. 3 stages. The Pacific was largely left to the Navy, minimal Army help expected there.
But the Navy had its own plan. A two-phase war focused squarely on the Pacific, and individuals mattered hugely, didn't they? Like Yamamoto.
Oh, immensely. Admiral Yamamoto, his influence was just enormous. Frank points out he literally threatened to resign to push through his Midway plan.
Which we now know was just part of an even bigger ambition, aiming for Hawaii eventually. That single-minded drive had huge consequences.
Absolutely. And it highlights that lack of true joint strategy between the Japanese Army and Navy, a critical factor Frank explores.
Okay, so strategy is complex on both sides. Now, thinking about intelligence, those coast watchers seem vital early on.
Incredibly vital, Eric Felt's network. By mid-41, they had this sort of natural fence, 64 stations across the Solomons, all with teleradios.
And they provided real-time intel.
Crucial intelligence. Think of Jack Reed's warnings literally getting Allied transports moving just hours before Japanese bombers arrived. It shows how these small, local intel efforts could have massive strategic impact.
But intelligence wasn't always a success story, was it? Especially for the Americans early in this campaign.
No, not at all. The U.S. codebreakers hit a major wall. The Japanese changed their main naval code, JN-25B, switched to JN-25C. Frank calls it an eclipse.
An eclipse, meaning
U.S. intelligence was largely blind for almost the entire campaign. They had scraps maybe from lesser codes, but the big picture was shrouded in uncertainty. They were flying blind in many ways.
Wow. And the Japanese, did they have better intel?
Ironically, no. They suffered from their own major blind spots. They completely misinterpreted Allied movements. They saw activity around Australia and New Guinea as just bolstering defenses there. They completely missed the setup of Gormley's new South Pacific Command.
And they weren't expecting a counterpunch.
Not at all. They were convinced the Allies wouldn't launch a major counteroffensive until 1943 at the earliest. Frank really emphasizes this fatal lethargy of mind on their part. Overconfidence, perhaps? Misreading American will.
A dangerous assumption. Which brings us right to the landings, August 7th, 1942, Operation Watchtower.
That's it. The 1st Marine Division hitting Guadalcanal, beach red, and it's just jungle. Dense, towering trees, those massive roofs tripping everyone up.
Chaos on the beach.
Sort of controlled chaos initially. Control breakdown fast, but the good news was no Japanese resistance right on the beach. But it quickly became a logjam. Landing craft grounded, supplies piling up everywhere, a real mess.
But Tulagi was different.
Very different. The Marine raiders hit Tulagi and faced immediate fierce resistance from the Japanese Special Naval Landing Force troops there. Tough fighters.
And there was that incident, Tanambogo.
Yeah, a bad situation. Bad intel about snipers led to a landing under the light of a burning gasoline dump. Heavy casualties for the raiders. It was a brutal introduction to the kind of close-quarters fighting that would define the campaign. Shows how quickly things could go wrong.
And the air war kicked off immediately, too. Zero versus Wildcat.
Right, and Frank gives you that balanced view again. The Wildcat had the edge in power. Definitely. Pratt & Whitney engine, 1,200 horsepower.
Against the Zero's Saki engine, about 950 AP.
Correct, so less power in a Zero, but its maneuverability was just phenomenal.
So pilots like Saburo Sakai could really make it count.
Exactly. They pulled off incredible feats. Despite the Wildcat having better armor and more firepower, it's that classic pilot skill and agility versus brute force contest.
But the very start of the naval campaign, it was a shock for the Allies, wasn't it? Sabao Island.
A massive shock. August 8th, 9th. Frank calls it a lesson in that lethargy of mind. A lopsided, devastating Japanese victory.
What went wrong for the U.S.?
Intelligence failure, primarily. Admiral Turner misread reports about seaplane tenders. They were actually Mikawa's cruisers. And the U.S. Navy was just not ready for Japanese night fighting tactics.
Were their torpedoes?
Especially their torpedoes, the Type 93 Long Lance. Phenomenal weapon. Mikawa's force just sliced through the weary Allied screen, sank the Australian cruiser Canberra, hammered the Chicago.
And then sank the Vincennes, Quincy, Astoria. Just terrible losses.
Devastating. Now, Mikawa controversially decided not to go after the vulnerable transports afterwards, much to the frustration of some of his captains, apparently.
A missed opportunity for him, maybe.
Perhaps strategically, yes. But his victory exposed huge weaknesses in U.S. night tactics and torpedo defenses. Though a small bit of payback, the Japanese cruiser Kako was sunk by the U.S. Sud S-44 a day or so later.
A chaotic start. Then came the first major land battle, Tenaru River.
Yeah, August 21st. Also known as the Battle of Alligator Creek sometimes. This really shows both the brutality and the role of intelligence again, Colonel Ichi's detachment.
They were overconfident.
Supremely confident. They believed the Marines were weak, maybe even already withdrawing. So Ichiki launched this. Frank calls it tactically dramatic frontal assault with bayonets right across a sandbar at the river mouth.
But the Marines were ready.
They were. Thanks to intel from patrols like Lieutenant Brush's and captured maps, they knew roughly where Ichiki was and what he might do. They set a trap.
Artillery played a big role.
Huge. The 75mm pack howitzers from the 11th Marines just tore into the attacking waves. It was a slaughter. Over 700 Japanese dead, including Ichiki. Marine losses were about 44 killed.
A brutal lesson. But Frank notes the Marines didn't fully grasp all the lessons right away.
Right. Lessons about terrain, Japanese tactics, maybe even underestimating their tenacity despite the loss. It was still early days.
Okay, so the conflict is heating up on land and sea. What about the bigger strategic picture?
Well, the Japanese had canceled their big FS operation, the plan to take Fiji, Samoa, New Caledonia, because of their carrier losses at Coral Sea and Midway.
But they still thought they had the initiative.
Amazingly, yes, especially the Army leadership. That disconnect again. This leads into the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, late August. Nagumo's carriers versus Fletcher's Task Force 61.
Saratoga, Enterprise, Wasp.
Right. The Japanese lost the light carrier Ryuho, but they managed to badly damage the Enterprise. Critically, though, both sides lost a lot of experienced carrier pilots.
A strategic cost, even if the battle itself was somewhat inconclusive.
Exactly. Especially for Japan, replacing those veteran pilots was becoming a real problem. And the battle also showed some continued weaknesses in U.S. fighter direction.
Still learning.
And meanwhile, on the island itself, conditions were deteriorating badly for the Marines.
Horrifically. Guadalcanal earned its nickname, Starvation Island. Rations were cut drastically. Constant Japanese air raids targeting Henderson Field, the airstrip, naval bombardments.
Sleep must have been impossible.
Pretty much. It was just relentless pressure, disease, malnutrition. This really drives home that theme of the brutality of combat and logistics. Frank uses accounts from both sides to show the sheer misery, which leads into another major land battle, Edson's Ridge, mid-September.
Also known as Bloody Ridge, named after Colonel Merritt, Red Mike Edson. Kawaguchi's brigade attacked from the south, trying to take the airfield.
A complex attack.
Yeah, Kawaguchi divided his forces multiple approaches through the jungle at night. But Edson, using native scouts and his own sharp instincts, anticipated the main thrust and set up his defense on this key grassy ridge south of Henderson Field.
And it was another brutal fight.
Incredibly intense. Fierce night attacks, Japanese human wave tactics met by devastating marine artillery and machine gun fire. Edson's leadership was crucial. The attacks failed.
And the Japanese withdrawal.
A nightmare for Kawaguchi's men. Starvation, disease, having to abandon their heavy weapons, just awful. It's another major blow to the Japanese efforts on land.
The naval war continued to seesaw, though. Cape Esperance.
October 11th, 12th. This time, a tactical wind for the U.S. Admiral Scott's force surprised Admiral Goto's cruisers at night.
So the U.S. Navy was learning.
Learning, yes, but still issues. There were friendly fire incidents, the destroyer Duncan was lost, the Boise badly damaged, partly due to hitting friendlies, and Frank notes, still not fully appreciating the danger of those long-lance torpedoes.
They just kept cropping up as a problem.
A persistent, deadly problem. And just days later, October 13th, 14th, the Japanese showed they could still bring massive firepower to bear.
The battleship bombardment.
Yeah. The battleships Congo and Haruna just pounded Henderson Field for about 90 minutes, destroyed dozens of aircraft, damaged the runway, forced air operations onto the secondary fighter strip. It was a stark reminder how vulnerable the Marines still were.
A real low point for the Americans on the island.
Definitely felt like it. Then later that month, another major carrier battle, Santa Cruz Islands, October 26th.
How did that one play out?
Tactically, it was a Japanese victory. They sank the USS Hornet and damaged the Enterprise again.
Sounds bad for the U.S.
It was. But strategically, it was a disaster for Japan. They lost pilots and aircrew they just couldn't replace. Frank argues this battle, despite the U.S. ship losses, really tilted the balance of naval air power in the Pacific towards the U.S. in the long run. Japan couldn't sustain those aircrew losses.
An interesting perspective, tactical win, strategic loss. Which brings us to the big one, the naval battle of Guadalcanal in November.
Mid-November, yeah. A series of incredibly brutal engagements over several days. It really was the climax at sea.
Starting with that Friday the 13th night battle.
Right, a chaotic, confused, close-range brawl. Admiral Abe's Japanese bombardment force running straight into Admiral Callahan's U.S. cruisers and destroyers.
Heavy U.S. losses again.
Very heavy. Callahan and Scott were both killed. Cruisers Atlanta, Juno sunk the Juno torpedoed later by a sub with almost no survivors, the Sullivan brothers' tragedy. But critically, they stopped Abe's battleships from shelling Henderson Field, and the battleship Haie was crippled, then sunk by air attacks the next day.
So despite the cost, a crucial strategic win for the U.S.
Absolutely. Saved the airfield. Then, subsequent actions over the next couple of days, U.S. aircraft hammered a Japanese transport convoy trying to bring reinforcements.
And another battleship fight.
Yes. Admiral Lee's U.S. battleships, particularly the USS Washington, using its radar effectively in another night action, found and sank the Japanese battleship Kirishima. That series of battles essentially sealed U.S. naval superiority around the island.
A decisive turning point. But the logistics struggle continued, didn't it? Even with sea control.
Oh, yeah. Especially for the Japanese. Their Tokyo Express, those high-speed destroyer, runs at night to ferry troops, and supplies faced constant threat from U.S. air power and PT boats.
And there was still one more sharp naval lesson for the U.S. Tasvaranga.
And in November, a tactical masterclass by the Japanese, sadly for the U.S., Admiral Tanaka's destroyers, running supplies, ran into a larger U.S. cruiser force under Admiral Wright.
And the Long Lances struck again.
Devastatingly, Tanaka's destroyers launched torpedoes and turned away. The U.S. cruisers, Minneapolis, New Orleans, Pensacola, were heavily damaged. Northampton sunk. Tanaka mostly got his supplies delivered too.
So even late in the campaign, the U.S. still hadn't mastered countering those torpedoes or night tactics.
It starkly highlighted ongoing deficiencies, yeah. Training, tactics, and their own faulty torpedoes were still problems. But strategically, the tide had turned irreversibly.
Which forced a major rethink in Tokyo.
A painful one. By December, Frank details the internal debates at Imperial General Headquarters. They finally had to face reality. Guadalcanal couldn't be retaken. The cost, especially in destroyers for the Tokyo Express, was becoming unsustainable. Admiral Kusaka warned it could cripple the fleet.
So they decided to withdraw.
Yes, Operation KE, the evacuation plan. But it was incredibly sensitive. They feared news leaking would cause mass suicides among the troops still fighting, starving on the island. Yeah. Yamamoto himself thought they'd be lucky to save a third of the 17th Army.
How did they plan to pull it off?
Meticulously. Feints, deception, making it look like they were reinforcing, not withdrawing. Incredible operational security.
And meanwhile, The U.S. forces on the island, now under General Patch, were still pushing.
Pushing hard. Final offensives, tough fighting for places like Mount Austin, the Gifu stronghold. Really brutal jungle warfare.
But they didn't realize the Japanese were leaving.
That's the incredible irony Frank highlights. A major U.S. intelligence failure right at the end. Patch and his command were convinced the Japanese ship movements were a prelude to a major reinforcement attempt or a final offensive.
So they were looking for the wrong thing.
Exactly. And that misunderstanding, that misinterpretation, allowed Operation KE to succeed brilliantly from the Japanese perspective. Between early January and February 1943, destroyers slipped in at night and evacuated over 10,600 starving but organized soldiers.
Wow. Nimitz admitted they were fooled.
He did. He later said, only skill in keeping their plans disguised and bold celerity in carrying them out enabled the Japanese to withdraw. A stunning evacuation under the noses of a superior enemy force.
So wrapping this all up, Guadalcanal, as Frank presents it, was truly the turning point.
Absolutely. He calls it the first definitive check to Japan's land expansion. It wasn't just one battle, but this long, grinding campaign that tested everything will, resources, adaptability.
American tenacity eventually won out. The Marines' grit, the Navy and Air Force's learning and adapting.
Yes, coupled with crucial factors like the Coast Watchers. But on the other side, Frank really points to that Japanese fatal lethargy of mind, the overconfidence, the strategic disconnects, and the logistical breaking point.
Even though they showed tactical brilliance at times, like Savo or Tassafaronga.
Right. Their grand strategy couldn't cope with the reality on the ground. It's a deep dive that goes way beyond just battles. It's about the human cost, the vital role of intel, logistics, leadership under pressure.
Understanding how small things, a code change, a scout report could ripple outwards is key.
Definitely. It's a campaign layered with lessons. So as we finish, maybe a thought for you, the listener, to consider. Even with what Frank calls a definitive account, what lessons might still be hiding in plain sight? Lessons about adapting when things go wrong, about the psychological endurance needed in any long struggle. What resonates for you from this brutal campaign in your own world today?